Welcome back. Good morning, Richard. Here we are again.
Right. With one of my favorite topics.
Yes,
Maybe three of my favorite topics, all embedded in one here. Okay.
that's right. We're going to talk about kids. We're going to talk about what kids do and don't do, and what kids need to be doing, and how all of those things intersect to maybe contribute to some of the challenges and problems that we see.
Probably as a way of introduction, we, during the pandemic, well, no, it's even before the pandemic. We all know the kids are spending a lot of time online. It's a constant, it's constant. It's in the news, it's in our homes, and people complain. She's always on her phone. He's always on his games. He's always on the computer. Where do kids get all this time? If they're spending 5 or 6 hours a day, why aren't they doing other things? Is what this podcast is about. If they were busy, if they were occupied, they wouldn't have the time to be on these video games all the time. So the question, where are they getting all this time? Okay, and that's kind of what we want to talk about.
Right, because if you think about a 24-hour day, let's just throw this out there real quick. If you think about a 24-hour day, if they sleep 8 hours,
right,
you're left with 16 hours.
right.
When they go to school, if you think about getting ready in the morning, traveling to school, attending school, traveling home from school, and we won't even count homework or anything. But if you just count that time, you're talking about maybe 8.5, 9 hours or so contributed to
travel time,
for traveling and everything. So
right.
I mean, now you're down to 7 hours,
Mm-hmm.
right? If kids are spending 5, 6 hours a day on electronic devices, that means 1 hour. There's 1 hour, maybe two, depending on your numbers, 1 or 2 hours a day for eating dinner, taking showers, and self-care, doing homework. All of this
chores,
all have to be confined within an hour or
right.
two.
Think about it. And you're absolutely right. If you divide the day, 24 hours, in 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours for sleep, 8 hours for school or work, whichever you want to talk about, and 8 hours for, if you're on devices for 5 or 6 or 7 hours a day, you're right. Everything else gets an hour.
Right.
Can't make more time.
Right.
So this time issue is something that Dr. Berney and I have talked about over and over again. And we kind of got hit by this. One of the things we learned when schools closed in the last quarter of the 2019-2020 school year, remember that everything closed. No, not only schools, many things closed for that period of time, and they remained closed over the summer. So it wasn't just 9 weeks, it was 9 weeks plus, it was almost 20 weeks that everything shut down. When they closed, there were 50 million K-12 students in this country. They had no class time. They had no extracurricular activities. Remember, there were no football games. There were no practices. Bands stopped functioning. There were no play practices. And there was no homework. So there was no class time, no extracurricular activities, and no homework to keep kids occupied. And also, the skating rinks and the parks and the recreational facilities also closed, so they couldn't do anything else. So beginning in this 6-month period from, say, March 15th to September 15th, one of the solutions was online learning. We're going to do remote learning, okay? Right. But it didn't work because districts weren't prepared they were making the transition to online learning. They were gradually beginning to make that transition in 2019, 2020.
It was very much the idea of building the airplane while you're in flight.
Well, and that's exactly what happened, because when the pandemic hit and we went online, we weren't prepared to go online. Right. We didn't have the infrastructure. And remember, Berney, how many kids didn't have computers?
I was just talking to a family about that yesterday. One of the schools that I worked at, because I was working in the schools at that time. One of
Yeah,
the schools that I worked at, the majority of kids, I think it was something about 75% of the kids did not
right.
have internet at home.
Right, 75%. So we're gonna say, well, we're gonna migrate everything online. Well, 3 out of 4 students didn't have a computer. And even fewer had high speed at that time,
Right.
high speed internet. It's becoming more common now, but most people didn't have, they couldn't afford high speed internet. Okay.
Right.
There were kids going to school on cell phones.
Hmm.
Kids who didn't have computers were able to use it. Could you imagine trying to go to school using a cell phone?
Or the parents, there were a lot of these parents, they would take their kids to, they would have like a tablet, like a
Mhm.
Android tablet or an iPad or something like that, and they would take them to like McDonald's so that
Because
they
they,
could get free Wi-Fi there.
because they had Wi-Fi.
So they were trying to do school at McDonald's.
Right. The libraries were closed. Okay.
Hmm.
So many libraries had closed at the
Right.
same time. So we just didn't have the infrastructure. There's more infrastructure today, but we didn't have the infrastructure for it then.
Right.
And also, if your parents are working from home, let's say you're a teacher and schools are closed, so you're doing everything from home. What if you have children in the house? You have your own children in the house that you're trying to take care of. They don't
Right.
have anything to do. They're
Yeah.
running around playing, with video games and stuff on, and you're at your computer all day long trying to deal with your students. It was just a fiasco.
Yeah.
And then you had the next year, the whole next school year, 2020 and 2021, where remember, not everybody went back to school in 2020, in the fall of 2020. This was the year of social distancing and quarantines and substitute teachers and teacher shortages and covering other people's classes and putting kids in the gym because we didn't have a teacher to cover that class.
Right.
It was a it was really very, very, very difficult. So during these difficult times, we learned we learned a lot of things, but one of the things we learned was the essential role that schools play in our complex culture.
Right.
All right. Suddenly we said, "Holy cow, we got to get we got to get everybody
Very
back to
important.
school because what are we going to do with these kids?" And I remember we used to have snow days up north, and people hated snow days because all these kids were running around. Instead, they weren't in school; they were running around town, getting into
Right.
trouble. Okay.
Right. Well, and if you think about it, because, and we talked about this in the podcast at the time, how so much of this became political. It became so political. One of the reasons why it became so political is because everybody was saying we need to get kids back in school. That was one of the political pushes, is that, you know, kids need to be back in school.
Whatever the price we have to pay, this is
Right.
intolerable. I mean, in that, year and a half period, it just became intolerable. So we began to say, wow, schools really are important in our culture. Okay. The second thing we learned was that children have way too much time on their hands. I think that's what parents realized that, man, these kids don't have anything to do. And especially if they're everything else closes in town, all the businesses and the parks and the public places close. These kids have absolutely nothing to do. Kids have too much time on their hands. Okay. And that's one of the things I worry about. So let's talk about the role of schools. First of all, schools provide a socializing function. You learn how to act in your culture by going to school. That's where you learn how to be a citizen. But the other thing it does is schools keep kids out of the workplace. That's why we have compulsory education. 100 years ago, 120 years ago, we had all these kids who were allowed to work.
Hmm.
Well, they were taking jobs that adults should have to provide for their families. So we said, how do we fix that problem? Let's get these kids in school and let's make them go to school. Let's make it compulsory that they go to school.
Right.
So during the Industrial Revolution, we said, get these kids out of factories, make them go to school so that these jobs can be held by the primary providers for the family.
Right.
It also keeps kids off the streets. If you put them in schools, they're not roaming around streets, stealing and causing trouble, getting into mischief.
Which
Okay.
is something that, again, became very apparent, during that period of the with the pandemic and everything. It's like,
Right.
kids were out and about, getting in trouble and causing problems.
Right.
And but even when, like, I remember when I was growing up, there was always talk about, latchkey kids and things like that. Those
Yeah.
of us who
Yeah.
just walked home from school after school, our parents
Hmm.
were working, you know,
Right.
s- another role of the school is that it gives the kids somewhere to go during the day so the parents can work.
Yeah, we want everybody to work, but if you have children, what do you do? That's the child care problem that we're
Right.
talking about in our country today. You want people to go to work, but what do you do with their kids?
Right.
Okay, so let's provide child care so that parents can go back to work.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So this interplay of all of these things allows the parents to work. It allows there to be job opportunities for adults that,
Right,
younger people aren't taking. But it keeps kids in safe, controlled settings so that they're not
right.
just running the streets and out there getting in trouble.
So, although schools have an obligation to educate kids, it's not the only role that we ask them to play. Okay. And we suddenly stubbed our toe on that during the pandemic. The second problem is kids had too much time.
Right.
We always knew this because um, things like snow days and what do you do with kids in early dismissal day? What do you do with kids over the holidays? And parents will say that, geez, the kids they don't have anything to, they don't have enough to do, too much time on their hands. But when you're off for 6 months, it brings the problem into stark relief. So how do
Right.
you keep kids? So the problem is, how do you keep kids occupied or busy? And in our country, we really don't have any way to do that except with schools.
Right.
Okay.
And if you remember, I meant to look it up and to remember when it came out. But remember the book Tiger Mom,
Yes,
right?
right,
Tiger Mom came out, and everyone was, some people were shocked and appalled. Other people were enthusiastic about this idea of, your kids need to be regimented and they need to have something that they're doing and they're practicing and they're rehearsing and they're doing all this every day. And I remember we talked to families a lot about, you want to keep them busy. You don't want to go so far.
right.
You don't need to be
Mhm.
involved in, 15 different activities so that every day, from the time that they get out of school until, 10 o'clock at night, they're busy and they're doing all these things. You don't want to do it like that. But kids need to have things to do. And
Right,
like you said, there's nothing else that we have during the day to keep kids busy in our country. And so,
right.
school certainly serves that purpose. I remember there was a time in the early 2000s when some of the schools in our district here experimented with year-round school,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
which I still kind of think is a good idea if we could figure out how to navigate it. But the problem was that periodically kids would have a week or two off of school.
Mhm.
Well,
That,
because it was inconsistent and it wasn't sort of with the routine, it was
right.
really hard for parents because, well, they have these 2 weeks off now, but the parents can't take vacation for 2 weeks. They can't,
Right.
and there's no childcare, day camps or summer camps that are available, in the middle of October. So it created some of those kinds of problems.
And the problem again was w- parents have to go to work. What do you do with the kids? Okay,
Yeah,
so schools provide this function unless you can homeschool. Now, for those people who have the advantage of homeschooling, that takes care of the problem. But most of us can't homeschool. We have to go to work, or we don't have the capacity, we don't have the ability. So because of all this, in most countries, we outsource education to schools. I mean,
right.
that's just the plain and simple fact is we outsource it to schools. And our economies then became structured to keep kids occupied both with class time and with homework. Parents love homework because it keeps the kids busy.
Yeah.
They're not causing trouble in the house. They're busy doing their homework. Okay. Whether homework works or not, whether it's valuable or not, it gives kids something to do. Okay. Because if the kids are occupied, then the parents can work. So we now know that schools are not just about learning, but schools have never been just about learning. They've always been about getting kids off the street, getting them out of the job market. We have compulsory education for a number of reasons, okay? But we have compulsory education. And the other thing we learned was that children just have way too much time on their hands, okay? And until the last quarter, I would say, the last decade maybe of the 20th century, so maybe the 1990s, certainly in the 1980s. Bernie, yeah, you were in school in the 1980s, right?
Right. Yeah,
Okay. If
92.
you weren't in school, what did you do?
We were outside,
I mean,
probably.
you didn't have, there weren't a lot of, the
Right.
internet wasn't around yet. I mean, you
Right.
didn't have access
Yeah.
to the internet, right?
Yeah. No, we were outside,
You didn't
playing
have a computer.
things like that. No, not until maybe the late 80s, when like Nintendo came out and things like that, but it was still kind of rare. We didn't spend a lot of
Right.
time doing it.
And so until the 1990s, really, if you weren't in school, you were probably at least a little bit bored. And
Right.
I can tell you that was a lot bored. If I wasn't in school because we had nothing. We had
Right.
three channels and they were soap operas and hospital shows. Um, there was a TV, you had TV and you might have had a couple of games, that you could play, but they were mainly arcade games that you had to go someplace else to play. You didn't have a PlayStation or stuff like that. So if you weren't in school, you were probably bored, very bored or partly bored.
Yeah.
But then came the middle 90s with the internet generation.
Mhm.
So the internet generation, these are kids born from 1995 on, who born into the internet.
Right.
You now had a powerful antidote for boredom.
Right.
And we now find ourselves facing this whole new set of circumstances in the 2000s, into the 2000s. Okay. And now we have a shift. We've had this, starting with the pandemic, we have this shift to online everything.
Right.
Okay. We had been building an infrastructure before that, but now that infrastructure exists.
Right. Well, and it's funny because our podcast is even an example of that, right?
Right.
Prior to the pandemic, you and I sat next to each other and we recorded the podcast sitting side by side,
Mhm.
as we were recording. Since the pandemic,
Because we had to be in the same place
we had to be in the
to
same
record it
room. Yeah.
together. Right. Mhm.
Now we can be in different places, and we can record, and it makes it very convenient.
We could be in different cities.
Different states. We
Right.
in different
Yeah.
states. Well, we recorded the podcast one time. Well, I mean, this was before the pandemic, but we recorded in another country.
Right. That's right.
Um,
Right. Mhm.
so yeah, but this shift to everything online, and it puts, especially with kids, it puts the creates the case for devices to be in their hands all the time.
That's what happened because beginning in 1995, we suddenly don't have to, we've solved the boredom problem.
Mhm.
Okay. So we've gone from in the 1980s where you had very little to do, beginning in the 1990s, we suddenly have this lurch, this sudden shift to online. Hey, everything is online. We have online classes. We
Mhm.
have patient portal. You want to see your hospital record? Go to the patient portal. We have online everything, online shopping, online everything. Okay. But everything includes the antidote for boredom. So for the first time in our history, in the history of our species, we can stay occupied and entertained 24 hours a day.
Right.
Huge change. That's an absolutely huge change. And the kids who were born in 1995 who had the internet, they've only known that.
Well, and I think what's fascinating when you talk to it, and it makes you feel, it does make you feel very old. When you talk to people about, you know, when we were growing up, if you wanted to watch something, you had to wait until it came on TV. You had to wait until a certain time on a certain day to
Right.
watch it. And if you missed it, you missed it.
Mhm.
Um, because now, like you said, it can be entertained for 24 hours a day. Any program that you want to watch just about is available.
Right.
You can stay occupied on Netflix forever, I think. It just seems like there is an endless supply of things to watch and entertain yourself with.
That's right. And we need to keep that in mind that we've gone from not having anything, there were three channels on your TV that didn't start until 7 o'clock in the morning and went off at 11 o'clock at night. You turn on, when I turned on the TV at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was nothing on, nothing was being broadcast. Okay. So, but since 1995 and then 2007, of course, with the introduction of the smartphone, everything now is available. And so we have what we call rabbit holes, but rabbit holes and other distractions. And here's the juxtaposition that we're talking about. During the pandemic, because they had so much time, kids were allowed to use electronics to replace that 8 hour segment that they would have been in school.
Right.
So now they have sleep for 8 hours, school for 8 hours, everything else. Now they don't have school. Now they're this block of 8 hours. And quite frankly, parents ran out of things to do.
Right.
And so they let their kids use the electronics. The problem is we never went back.
Yeah.
Okay. We went there during the pandemic and we kind of stayed there. All right.
Now, if somebody just heard part of what we were just talking about, they would say, "Oh, great, yeah, have found the antidote to boredom. That's a fantastic thing." But it's not, because what it is that we are back to this, because we would kind of include that mindless scrolling, the just flipping through social media and even video games to a large extent. We would include that in, you're not really doing anything. You're entertaining yourself and you're keeping yourself from being bored, but you're not doing anything. And the problem that we have with it, and what we often encourage the parents that we work with to do is, your kids have to have something to do. If they don't have anything to do, that's what they're going to do. If they don't have anything to do, they're going to be on their device. They're going to be on their video games or on their phones or whatever. But they have to be engaged in something. You have to give them things to do.
And also, yes, these devices are compelling. Yes, they're addictive. Yes, it's dopamine. We've been through all that. Yes, we know all that. But the problem isn't limited to the addictive nature of the device. The other side, flip that coin over, and the real problem is that kids have too much time on their hands.
Right.
So they're going to do something that's fun or entertaining or challenging or something, okay?
Right.
Because they have too much time on their hands.
Right.
If a kid, Caitlin Clark's this famous basketball player. If she's playing basketball, she's not on her cell phone.
Right.
If you're doing something else, you can't be on your device. Right. So the problem is not just the devices. That's not where the devil resides. The other devil is we all have too much time. We all have too much time, but particularly kids, because this is the only world that they know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what's a parent to do? There was a show, What's a Mother to Do? There was a commercial years ago. What are parents to do? Well, first of all, doing nothing cannot be an option. For kids, doing nothing can't be an option. We can't be as engaged as we were in 2020. That emergency is over.
Right.
So spending all those hours that kids spent during the pandemic, that emergency is over. Now we have to get back to another kind of life. So we have to fill their time with other activities.
Right.
Now, what are those other activities? They might be athletic activities. They might be artistic endeavors. They might even be chores. They might even be helping with dinner. These kids simply have too much time on their hands. So for parents today, the difference for parents today, and we talked about this in another podcast, now you have to come up with legitimate ways to keep children occupied in other activities, and you need to be involved in their lives so that they are engaged in other activities. Because if you don't do that, I can tell you exactly where they're going to be spending their time.
Right. Yeah, and I think that that's an important point that kids, if you can't just say you need to go do something, but it can't
Correct.
be on your device, it can't be on your video games, it can't be on the TV, it can't be an electronic thing, because the reality, the sad reality is that most kids don't have much more than that. It's not like, think about a teenager where they don't have toys, they don't have, you're thinking about a 12, 13, 14-year-old, they can't drive anywhere. Um,
Right. Mhm.
most of the time they go to school with people who don't live around them, so they can't go outside and see their friends. Um, or it's a billion degrees outside. Like we have here.
100% humidity.
Yeah.
Your
Um,
clothes melt.
it's they can't there's all these things that they just can't do.
Right.
And so it's not that you have to sit next to them and keep them entertained while at the same time needing to cook and all that kind of stuff that parents have to do, but you have to make sure that they have things. You have to make sure that they have things that they can, sort of a menu of things that they can choose from to do, so they can read. If your kid is having problems at school reading, they're not going to choose to read. So
Right.
it doesn't need to be on the menu because they're not going to choose that. And it's probably false hoping for the parent to say, well, if they don't have anything else to do, they're going to read. Probably not.
Right.
They're not
Right.
going to do it. But you have to give them some other things to do.
Right. And and I think it's essential during the pandemic. Parents were working with families, and they would say, "Well, my kids they have so much time on their hands that we just let them play video games." And I said, "Well, who makes dinner?" And so we
Right.
would say to parents, "Look, the meal has to be prepared, setting the table and preparing the meal. The meal has to be consumed, and then the kitchen has to be cleaned." Okay, so there's three places there that will keep kids engaged. Involve your children in the preparation of dinner, have them sit and have dinner for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, and then they should help with cleanup. Well,
Right.
what do many kids do? They come down, they eat in 2 minutes, and they go back to their room.
Right.
Well, the only reason they're going back to the room is they have nothing, nobody has
Structured.
any other expectations. Okay.
Yeah.
So kids are sort of treated like hotel guests. We tend to do that. We tend to treat them as guests. They don't have to prepare the meal. They don't have to clean the kitchen. No, they should be participating fully in the life of the family. That includes family time. You don't
Right.
get to sit in your bedroom for 4 hours.
And parents, we know, up front, that asking this means that you're going to have to stay on top of them for this. It's
Right.
not like your kids are going to come, bouncing downstairs or from their bedroom and say, "Hey, I know
Mhm.
it's time for dinner. What can I do to help?" I'm not going to do that most of the time.
Mhm.
It'd be great if some did, but they don't. At my house, for example, we have to call them out every night and say, you know, um, we're getting ready for dinner. You need to do this, or this. Every night after dinner, we say, okay, we all are going to help clean up, because if we don't, they're going to scoot and out of the room as fast as possible. Every night they ask, "What can I do?" We say, "You need to help us clean up." They'll say, "What do you want us to do?" Every night we say the exact same thing, that they need to do the same thing every night, clean off the
Right.
table. But as the parents, that's the part that we do. We're not again sitting next to them making sure that they're actively engaged, but we are telling them, these are the things that you need to be doing right now
That's right.
and that
That's
you
right.
need to do next. This is what you do next. But they have to stay engaged.
That's right. So as you approach this thing about my child spending too much time on electronics, remember that it's your obligation as a parent to develop a list of those activities that your child should be doing. And one of the first things I would do is children have to learn that they need to participate in the life of the family. They're not guests. Kids, you need to start thinking of your children as part of the staff,
Yeah.
not guests in your house. They're part of the staff. I mean, they're not hotel guests.
Right.
And they should be helping with cleaning and with laundry and with preparing meals and having meals. There just should be these expectations that
Right.
you're going to be occupied from 4:30 with dinner preparation until 7:30 when the kitchen is completely cleaned, and everybody participates at every meal. It's not like, well, you have to do it on Tuesday and you have to. No, you're not a guest on Tuesday. You
Right.
help with every evening meal,
Absolutely.
not just once or twice a week. So develop these other activities. Parents today, since 1995, I'm sorry, parenting has changed. And one of the obligations, my parents didn't have that obligation because we didn't have an internet when I grew up. So they didn't have to worry about this. We were out doing other things because there was nothing else to do. If I had an internet when I was 12 or 13, I can tell you I would have been on the internet. I would be doing what these kids are doing. I
Right.
don't claim any moral superiority. I just didn't have this stuff.
Right.
So parenting is going to be different today. And one of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to come up with activities to keep your children occupied, productive, and get used to the idea that they have other obligations rather than just entertainment.
Absolutely. I think we're going to keep harping on this because
Oh, yeah.
we
Yeah.
did it. We did another podcast not too long ago called the 168-hour solution, the 168
Right.
hour rule, where we're talking
Right.
about the same thing that, you have kids have to have things to do to occupy some of that time that they're spending, idly working on their, video games or whatever. So,
Yeah. It's we've created the most seductive, interesting, entertaining thing that our civilization has ever known, but we don't want you to use it.
right.
We're
Absolutely.
going to
So you have to give them other things to do. So,
That's right. There has to be more than that. We don't have to get rid of that. We talked about banning, these things last week. You don't have to ban it. You just have to, we just have to take our children in places where they learn how to do other things that are equally important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were going to talk more about this in weeks to come. We believe that kids need to be involved in lots of things, whether it's
Right.
home, things at home, whether it's their schoolwork or whether it's their treatment. We're going to talk about that
Yeah.
podcast
Mhm.
coming up soon.
Right.
So, but that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.